You people should know your place. The airport lounge smelled of roasted coffee, leather chairs, and wealth. It wasn't the kind of place where people rushed or raised their voices. The floor gleamed, the windows stretched floor to ceiling, and calm instrumental music hummed in the background. Businessmen glanced at stock tickers on their tablets, influencers recorded soft-spoken updates for their followers and attendants, walked lightly as if noise itself was forbidden. But the atmosphere shifted when she walked in without needing to announce herself, without anyone knowing who she really was. Maya Jameson moved with a kind of poise that didn't beg for attention, yet refused to go unnoticed. Her black suit was cut with precision, her heels sharp enough to look like weapons, and her dark skin shimmered under the overhead lighting, as if the room itself adjusted for her presence. She approached the airline counter and handed over her boarding pass with a soft, confident smile. Woman behind the counter barely looked up. She was young, chewing gum, while scrolling her phone, and a name tag read Sydney in big friendly letters, but her eyes weren't friendly at all. She glanced at the pass, then at Maya, then back again. A small wrinkle formed between her brows. "Think there's a mistake," she said, her tone clipped. "You're booked in economy." Maya kept her expression steady. "No, this ticket is for the Skyspan Elite Executive Suite. It's a private pod on Flight 219 departing at 9:15. I booked it myself, and the confirmation code is listed on the pass. You may want to check against Sydney." Rolled her eyes, tapped her screen and squinted, then loudly repeated, "Ma'am, this says economy class right here. Do you want me to print it out for you?" A man behind Maya let out a little chuckle and whispered something to the person beside him. It was the kind of laugh that wasn't about humor but power, the kind that said, "I know what this looks like." Maya's jaw tightened, but she kept her tone cool. "That ticket is linked to a corporate account. Double-check your system under the name MJ Holdings Group, or you can scan the QR code on my badge. It will show my status." Sydney didn't move. Instead, another attendant stepped in, a tall man in uniform who glanced at Maya, then gave Sydney a nod. "It's fine." Sid let her wait in economy until it's sorted, he said, brushing her off as if Maya were nothing more than a misplaced suitcase. "She can't just stand here holding." Up the line, the passengers behind her were growing restless, some muttering, others clearly enjoying the unfolding scene. It was rare entertainment to see someone put in their place. Maya stepped aside, her breath slow and measured. She could feel the judgment in the air, not from what she wore or how she spoke, but from what people thought they knew about women like her. The kind who didn't belong in first class, the kind who looked out of place in places soaked in privilege and protected by tradition. The economy waiting area was overfilled, noisy, chaotic. Maya stood near the edge, scrolling silently on her phone, ignoring the glances and whispers. A little boy beside her looked up in awe. "You look like a boss," he said. "I think you could be in charge of a whole plane." She smiled for the first time, then crouched slightly and said softly, "I just might be monst." Later, 3 figures emerged from the private corridor, 2 men and a woman, all in sleek suits, clearly not from ground staff. The one in the center spotted Maya, and his face turned pale as paper. He rushed over, extending his hand, but then thought better of it, and simply said in a stunned whisper, "Ms. Jameson, oh my God, I am so sorry. There's been a terrible mistake. We didn't know you were on this flight. We thought you were traveling later in the week." Maya looked up and tilted her head. "Why would I travel later in the week when I scheduled this exact pod for this exact time? I'm rarely off schedule." The man winced. "Yes, of course. You're absolutely right. We're scrambling to fix it now. The flight team had no idea someone from our board of investors was flying today. We apologize. Sincerely, Sydney." And the male attendant were now watching from the counter, their faces drained of color, mouths slightly open. Neither moved. Sydney dropped her phone onto the desk without realizing it. "VE prepared the executive jet pod for you," the second man said. "Your favorite refreshments are stocked, and the suite has been cooled to your preferences." Before Maya moved, she turned and gave one long look toward the counter, then said to the executive, "Pause boarding for Flight 219 please, and pull the cabin crew from the aircraft immediately." The executive blinked. "I'm sorry, Paul." The crew. Maya's tone remained even. "You'll understand when you review the internal report I just filed through our compliance channel. I believe it includes audio from this check-in desk, as well as live surveillance footage from Gate 14. His eyes widened, and he nodded. "I'll handle it immediately, Ms. Jameson." As she walked with them past stunned passengers, one woman whispered, "Wait, who is she?" And the man beside her said quietly, "That's Maya Jameson. She owns part of Sky's Airlines, she's a billionaire and she's on the board. The news spread like fire. Everyone who had laughed or whispered was now silent. Some pulled out their phones, others just stared as if watching a ghost inside. The executive pod, the air was chilled. Lavender scented the leather seat adjusted to her exact posture, and a glass of sparkling water waited. Beside imported fruits, Maya didn't touch anything. Instead, she sat with her hands folded watching the runway through the tinted window. She wasn't angry, not really, not anymore. She was used to this, used to being underestimated, dismissed, mistaken for a secretary or a guest of someone richer. She had spent years letting people underestimate her, and now she was done with that. Back in the terminal, Flight 219's departure announcement was delayed indefinitely, and passengers were told there would be a crew change due to an operational reassignment. The staff behind the counter had vanished, replaced by temporary substitutes brought from another gate. Sydney's headset was removed by a supervisor, and her badge was collected with a brief nod. She didn't speak a word, she didn't argue, she knew better. Maya's phone buzzed again, a message from the company's CEO himself asking to schedule a private call that evening to apologize personally and assure her of immediate corrective actions. She typed back only one sentence: "Your response will be noted in the upcoming board review later." In the flight after takeoff, one of the new attendants stepped in and nervously asked if she needed anything. Maya looked up, smiled kindly and shook her head. "I'm fine," she said. "Really, I just needed to breathe." She leaned back, closed her eyes and exhaled for the first time all day, but deep down she knew this wasn't just about being denied a seat or treated unfairly. It was about the unseen lines that still existed in high places, the silent judgments that still thrived in polished rooms, the invisible ceilings disguised as misunderstandings. Something told her that this flight was only the beginning of something far bigger than one airline, because she had a plan now, a quiet, powerful plan that would shake more than just the flight schedule. It would shake the entire foundation of who got to sit where and why, and the world wasn't ready for it, not yet, but they would be very soon. The flight that changed everything. The aircraft soared through the night sky, its engines humming steadily as the city lights faded below and clouds swallowed the view from Maya's window. She sat perfectly still, her body relaxed but her mind sharp and alert. Inside her jet pod the world was silent, insulated from chaos but not from thought. Everything that happened at the gate replayed in her mind like scenes from a film, not because it surprised her but because it didn't. She had learned early in life that respect was conditional, often offered only after credentials were proven, and receipts were laid bare. Even now, after everything she built from scratch, she was still being questioned by people who couldn't see beyond skin and gender. The seatbelt sign flickered off, and a young flight attendant entered the pod, carrying a tray with a warm towel, tea, and imported chocolates. Maya looked at the tray and gave a polite nod, placing the towel over her hands, but not taking the food. She was used to being served like royalty in this cabin, not out of kindness but fear. The staff now knew who she was, but it was too late for kindness, too late for fake courtesy. "Would you like anything else, ma'am?" the attendant asked, voice trembling slightly. Maya simply shook her head, and the woman nodded before stepping back out, bowing slightly as the door closed behind her. Alone again, Maya pulled out her tablet and opened her confidential work files. The incident at the gate was already marked and timestamped in a compliance folder. She dictated a few lines into the document, noting the staff names, the sequence of refusal, and the clear violation of company dignity policies. There would be no loud confrontations, no shouting, no media statements. Maya didn't fight with noise. She worked in silence and let power echo through quiet decisions. She tapped open another file labeled Board Projects. Under this was a subfolder called Operation Restructure. Inside were key names, job titles, salaries, performance ratings, and termination potential scores. Each crew member from Flight 219 had already been logged. Maya had made the decision the moment Sydney had rolled her eyes and the male attendant had told her to stand aside. She had seen their type before, and she knew what would happen if she had stayed quiet. They would do it again to someone else, someone who didn't have the authority to fight back. The jet adjusted altitude and the lights dimmed. Maya stood and walked toward the small window where her reflection floated against the dark sky. She studied herself, not for beauty or signs of age, but for something else, something deeper. She had spent years hiding parts of herself, softening her tone, straightening her hair, choosing dresses instead of suits, smiling when she wanted to scream, but not anymore. Her Phone vibrated in her hand, a message from her assistant. Waiting on the ground, Ms. Jameson just received internal updates. The crew from 219 has been reassigned pending final review per your directive. Press is unaware. So far I'll prep statements if needed. Also note, VP Miller called 3 times during your ascent. Should I schedule him for your return? Maya responded swiftly. No statements necessary yet. And do not schedule Miller. Tell him to wait. She closed the phone and sat again, this time not in her pod seat but cross-legged on the floor. The way she used to sit in college when her only office was a borrowed library chair and her entire net worth was saved in a second-hand backpack. Back then she used to dream of owning a single business. Now she oversaw 30 brands across 5 industries and sat on 3 global boards. Still, it was never enough, because she wasn't just building a legacy for herself. She was building one for every woman who had ever been told she didn't belong. At that same moment, miles away, inside downtown headquarters, an emergency meeting was taking place, not because a plane was late, but because Maya Jameson had spoken. And when Maya spoke, decisions moved, departments shifted, and careers either ascended or collapsed. VP Miller paced the room, flipping through printed emails and staff reports. How did we miss her name from the manifest? He demanded. Someone explained why no one flagged this. Why didn't she get the elite service tag? A tech analyst stammered. Her name was entered under MJ Holdings, not Maya Jameson. The system didn't link the two because it was a bulk corporate booking. Miller slammed a pen onto the table. That's not good enough. She's a silent owner in this company. You think silent means invisible? She's the reason we're still afloat after last year's investor exodus. An executive spoke softly. Her report went directly to compliance, not even to HR. That means she's bypassing us completely. This isn't a review, this is a warning. Miller knew what that meant. When Maya skipped HR and filed under investor compliance, it meant the board would be reviewing policy breaches. It meant someone's job or several would be gone by the end of the week. Back in the air, Maya reviewed an older file, a private folder labeled Last Straw. It was a collection of notes spanning 10 years of travel. Each entry was a small humiliation, a refusal to acknowledge her status, a security officer asking if she was carrying someone else's ID, a hotel desk requesting to confirm her name 3 times before allowing check-in, a server asking if she could afford the bottle she ordered on a business dinner. Each entry dated and logged with names, locations, and comments, not because she was petty, but because patterns mattered, evidence mattered. People changed when you held a mirror to their habits. Another buzz interrupted her train of thought, this time a call from the pilot himself, requesting permission to patch in the executive director of Skyspan Operations. Maya granted it, not because she needed to speak, but because she wanted them to feel the weight of her silence. Miss Jameson, I want to personally extend my deepest apology, came the voice. You were mistreated, and I take full responsibility. The crew will be removed from duty effective immediately, and we're reviewing ground procedures across all terminals. Maya spoke softly, but clearly that's not enough. I don't need an apology, I need systemic accountability. This isn't just about me, it's about how your staff sees value and who they think deserves respect. I don't want replacements. I want retraining across every VIP desk nationwide. I want every executive to complete bias protocol, and I want Sydney and the other attendant offered the option to go through that training or leave quietly. Their choices will define whether they stay in aviation or disappear from Ether. Executive swallowed hard. Understood. Will execute immediately, and thank you for your grace. In handling this without public fallout, Maya ended the call and turned off the screen. She leaned back in her seat and finally took a sip of tea, letting the warmth settle inside her chest, not because the day had gone smoothly, but because she had chosen not to let someone else's ignorance shrink her worth. The seat began to recline, and stars blinked outside her window, but Maya didn't sleep. She planned, reviewed, and imagined a world where young girls who looked like her could walk into any room, any terminal, any boardroom, and never be told to wait in economy again. Then, while the plane flew on through the clouds, something else began to move to a quiet revolution, sparked not by protest but by precision, not by rage but by was no longer just a passenger. She was the storm in the sky, a name that breaks doors. It plane landed just as the sun began slicing through the clouds, casting golden streaks over the runway like someone had spilled fire across the sky. Maya remained seated until every other passenger had disembarked, not because she needed to, but because she wanted a moment alone with her thoughts and the silence before the next Wave of reactions hit. The door opened, and a private car waited directly beside. The steps, engine humming softly, driver standing at attention. No delay, no questions asked. She stepped down onto the tarmac. Her phone lit up again, this time with messages from people she hadn't heard from in years, some congratulating her, some apologizing, others pretending they had always supported her rise, even when she could still hear their laughter from boardrooms past. Her assistant greeted her with a file already prepared, printed. Tabs, color-coded summaries clipped in place. There's a situation. At headquarters she began, not panicked but crisp. Legal team says media got a whiff of the in-air crew, change, someone leaked it. No official coverage yet, but a few reporters are circling. They know something happened, but not the details. Maya opened the file and scanned the key names, her eyes settling on a section titled Influence Watch List. It was a small list of individuals who frequently engaged in discriminatory behavior at the company, but never enough to be caught or publicly challenged. Until now, 2 names were circled in red: Sydney and Marcus, the check-in desk pair from the airport. Both had internal warnings filed against them in the past for dismissive treatment of elderly passengers and bilingual clients. Their files had been growing in silence, and Maya knew exactly how to break that silence. "We do not defend them," she said to her assistant. "We educate or eliminate. Give them the choice, but document everything. If they resist, quietly close their access. No drama, no warning. Just precision and consequence." As the car sped away from the tarmac and toward the city's skyline, Maya stared out the tinted window where her reflection floated against the glass and watched the world outside blur into movement. It wasn't about revenge for her, it was about pattern breaking. A culture does not change with statements. A culture changes with structure, accountability, and the kind of pressure that turned stubborn stone into shaped design. When she reached headquarters, the energy inside the building was buzzing but fragile. As she entered the executive floor, the receptionist straightened, the assistants froze mid-step, and even the regional directors waiting outside the boardroom stopped speaking as she passed. Maya didn't acknowledge any of them. She moved like wind through concrete, silent but unmistakably real. Inside the boardroom, the walls were lined with LED screens showing global stats, market shifts, partnership maps, but every single executive present had their eyes locked on Maya as she entered. She didn't wait for greetings. She placed the file on the table, opened the first page, and said quietly, "Let us begin. We've already taken preliminary action." One board member began, voice uncertain. "The crew has been reassigned indefinitely, and we've launched a soft internal audit of terminal check-in procedures." Maya looked up slowly. Soft audits are for suppliers and vendors, not people who publicly degrade one of their own and mistake their investors for intruders. "We're not auditing behaviors, we are diagnosing a disease." And director leaned forward with caution. "Maya, I think we're all on the same page, but if we go to public with this, we may face accusations of internal instability, especially from competing airlines. The market is fragile right now." Maya walked to the wall screen and tapped a button, bringing up a customer satisfaction graph, which had been declining for months. "You're worried about instability," she said, "while your foundation is rotting." From silence, "Let me be clear, I am not asking for permission, I am giving you a deadline sheet." Clicked another tab, revealing a prepared restructuring plan, including reassignments, exit pathways, retraining modules, and reputation recovery strategies to be deployed if public questions arose. It was detailed, surgical, and above all rooted in long-term reform. "I am giving each department 72 hours to submit proof of policy revision aligned with this plan," she continued. "Anyone who misses that window is deemed out of sync with company vision and will be replaced." No extensions, no debate. The room was still a mix of admiration, fear, and hesitation, blending into something unspoken but powerful. Maya sat again calmly and asked any further thoughts. One man across the table cleared his throat nervously. "You've always had our respect, Maya, but some staff are saying this is just about your feelings from the gate incident. Shouldn't we treat it as an isolated HR error?" Maya looked him dead in the eyes. "If you believe this is about my feelings, you're not paying attention. This isn't about one insult, it's about the fact that this insult happened after 1,000 silent ones. This is about what happens when the culture you lead assumes the face of power cannot look like mine." She stood again, picked up the file, and walked out without waiting for their reply, leaving behind a room now cracked open by truth. Later that evening she was invited to a gala, not by choice but obligation. It was an industry networking event, and she knew her absence would be more controversial than her presence. so she arrived dressed in a deep green suit that glimmered like stormlight, poised, powerful, and without a single accessory. She didn't need decoration when her presence was already a statement. The ballroom was filled with champagne smiles, artificial laughter, and cameras that captured everything except what mattered. But as she moved through the crowd, people parted like waves around her. Some nodded respectfully, others avoided her eyes. A few approached with apologies veiled as compliments. "I've always admired how you handle yourself, Maya," one woman said. "I think people are just intimidated by your success." Maya smiled. "You don't intimidate people with success. You only threaten them when you stop apologizing for it." Man stepped closer, extending a hand. "Maya, I run media relations for Skyspan. If you'd allow me, I'd love to shape the public message surrounding the airport incident. You have a powerful story, and we can make it inspiring instead of inflammatory." Maya didn't take his hand. She replied softly, "You don't get to shape this story, because it's not yours to soften if it makes some people uncomfortable. Maybe that's the point." She had walked away without another word, heading toward the balcony where the night air was cooler and the stars above clearer than they had been inside the manufactured glitter of that hull. She stood there alone for several minutes, staring into the dark, thinking about how far she had come and how far there still was to go. A voice interrupted her thoughts, soft but sure. "Miss Jameson." She turned. It was a young woman, perhaps 23, dressed in catering staff uniform, holding a tray, but clearly not here to serve him. "Sorry, I just needed to tell you something," she said nervously. "My name is Kira. I'm studying aviation law, and I work events like this to pay for school. I saw what happened. I watched the news and read the forums. You don't know me, but I know you. You gave me language for things I didn't know how to explain." Maya looked at her, surprised but calm. "And what do you want to do with that language?" Smiled, not timid, but bright. "I want to break the rules that break people." Maya nodded slowly, then reached into her pocket, pulling out a card with only 2 words and a number printed on it. No title, no logo, just clarity. She handed it to Kira and said softly, "When you're ready, call that number. Tell them you spoke to the name that breaks doors." Kira took the card, her hand shaking a little, and Maya walked away back into the golden noise of the event, her figure tall, unshaken, a reminder that sometimes change doesn't come through slogans or speeches. Sometimes it comes through the quiet, steady walk of a woman who refused to sit where they told her, and she was only just beginning the silence before the uprising. The morning after the gala, the city seemed quieter than usual, as if it too had overheard the conversations from the night before, and now waited to see what would happen next. Maya sat in her penthouse facing the skyline, a black coffee untouched beside her, and a folder resting on her lap. The walls of her home were lined with books, art, and silence. The kind of silence that only came from knowing you no longer needed to prove yourself to anyone. But even in the quiet, her thoughts were moving sharper than ever. The file she held was marked confidential, but it wasn't a corporate file, it was personal. It contained handwritten notes, emails, printed screenshots, social media, threads from employees around the country who had experienced what she had in airports' lobbies, meetings, hallways, stories of subtle dismissals, quiet exclusions, veiled laughter, coded words, and constant questioning of their competence, dignity, and presence. She had asked her assistant to gather these, not for revenge, but for clarity, because before change could be designed, it had to be understood deeply from the inside out. She flipped through the pages, her fingers tracing each line, like the edge of a blade, reading the names of women who had been told to wait, who had been asked whose name is on the card, who had been assumed to be the help or the mistakes. He closed the file and picked up her phone, dialing a private line. 1 ring, 2 rings, then a voice answered, calm, male, firm. "Hello, it's time." Maya said nothing else needed. The voice replied, "Understood." 2 hours later she arrived at Skyspan headquarters again, but this time not for a board meeting. She walked past the main entrance, took the service elevator to the media floor, and stepped into a studio where cameras, lights, and technicians were already waiting. A woman in her 50s greeted her with a nod and handed her a simple microphone. "You're live in 5, she said. "Do you want teleprompter?" Maya shook her head. "No script. Truth doesn't need rehearsals." The light above the camera turned red, and the countdown faded. Maya stared directly into the lens and began. "This is not an apology. This is not a press stunt. This is an answer to a question no one was supposed to ask out loud." She told the story clearly, not just about the gate, but about every moment leading to it, from the silent glares to the boardroom stares, from the hotel receptions to the dismissive gate agents. The story of a woman who built empires but still had to prove she belonged in the places she had helped create, and then she paused just long enough for the silence to press in before she spoke the truth they never expected. Die. Own 10% of Skyspan Airlines, and beginning today, I will be using that influence to reshape every policy, every training, and every culture code that has allowed this kind of treatment to persist. I am creating a division called Equity in Motion, and it will have power to review, fire, or replace any team member regardless of rank. If you believe professionalism is tied to complexion or confidence to gender, this will not be the place for you anymore. She ended the recording with one line, clear and unshakable. I was told to wait in economy because they didn't know who I was. Now I want everyone to know exactly who I am. The video was released across official platforms but also sent to employees directly within 24 hours. It had over 2 million views. Industry insiders called it bold, disruptive, uncomfortable, real, but the people who mattered most, the silent ones, the dismissed ones, the always questioned, finally felt like someone had turned on the light inside. Regional offices, things began to shift. Training programs were paused and rewritten. Managers who had never attended equity sessions were now required to finish them under direct audit lines. Supervisors who joked behind closed doors were now held accountable by their own teams, as the internal culture no longer protected them. Sydney and Marcus, the gate attendants, from that day were given a choice: attend a 90-day rehabilitation and empathy immersion program designed in partnership with national equity leaders, or resign. Quietly, with no severance, both refused the program. Both were let go, their exit letters clear and documented, not to humiliate but to prevent them from doing harm somewhere else inside the walls of Skyspan. People whispered, not out of fear but curiosity. They wondered how long Maya had been planning this. Some believed it was a reaction to an insult. Others suspected she had always known this moment would come and had simply been waiting for the right incident to spark what she had already prepared. Meanwhile, Maya stayed quiet in public, not granting interviews, not accepting award nominations that now flooded her inbox. Instead, she spent her time visiting the smallest offices, the least funded teams, the most overlooked terminals. She sat with baggage staff, cleaning crews, customer service agents, and asked them one simple question: what do you wish someone at the top would finally hear? She documented everything, not to post it, not to brag, but to build something solid, a blueprint for how to lead without pretending the world was already fair. One morning, while walking through the lowest-ranked terminal in the company, she saw a familiar face, a young woman standing behind the snack counter, wearing a cap that read Flight Fuel. It was Kira, the catering staff from the gala. Maya smiled and walked up quietly. How's aviation law treating you? Kira looked up, eyes wide, then laughed softly. Still paying for books with tips, but I haven't stopped. I still carry that card. Maya nodded. If you're serious, I'll fund your final year, but there's one condition. Kira blinked. Anything. Spend your first year post-graduation inside our new equity division, reviewing the very policies you've experienced firsthand. You help rewrite them from the inside. Kira stared at her for a long moment, then nodded, her voice shaking slightly. Deal. That same week, Maya's team began receiving requests from other companies, airline competitors, finance firms, even luxury brands, asking to consult with her new division, seeking guidance, wanting to avoid their own scandals before they erupted. Some were sincere, some were just scared, but Maya didn't care. Let them fear silence. For once, she thought, let them wonder if the next woman they dismiss might also own the building they work in. That night in her penthouse, she finally allowed herself a moment to exhale. She stood barefoot in front of her window, watching the lights of the city shimmer across the glass. Her reflection looked back at her, not as someone tired or angry, but as someone finally visible on her own terms. Her assistant texted final updates of the day: global equity report, trending employee response, approval at all-time high. Sydney and Marcus replacement candidates selected, Kira onboarding scheduled. Maya smiled for the first time in weeks, not out of victory, but out of something far more rare and precious: peace. But even in that peace, she knew there were more battles to come, more doors to open, more lies to dismantle. Still, for the first time in a very long time, she didn't feel alone, and the airline that once told her to wait was now flying on a path she had drawn with her own hands. Not as a passenger, not as a client, but as the woman rewriting the flight plan for everyone who had ever been told to stay in their place when power is personal. The week began with thunder in the sky and fire in the headlines. Every business blog, magazine and social media page had turned their eyes toward Maya Jameson, not just as a billionaire board member, but as a public figure leading what some called a corporate revolution and others called a personal vendetta. Articles debated her actions, questioned her motives, praised her leadership, or accused her of overreach. Television hosts hosted panels analyzing her every sentence. Journalists dug into her history seeking cracks or contradictions, and strangers online dissected her story with no understanding of the years that shaped her fire. She had expected attention, but not this storm. Not the way people who once smiled at her in boardrooms now whispered behind closed doors. Some angry that she had spoken, others furious that she had been heard. Some executives feared they might be next on her radar and began scrubbing their digital history for anything that might be seen as bias or negligence, hoping to avoid becoming another example in the ongoing transformation. Maya watched the headlines unfold from her office, high above the city's skyline, the windows towering and clear, the room quiet and still, but her heart far from calm. Her assistant entered holding a phone with tension on her face. Maya, someone leaked your equity reform files. The press has a copy, it's spreading fast, and some influencers are saying you're building a blacklist. One outlet said, you're setting dangerous precedent by letting emotions override business strategy. Maya stood silently, took the phone and read the article. It was filled with cherry-picked quotes, loaded terms, and anonymous employee interviews that described her as ruthless, cold, unreasonable. It even included an opinion piece titled, "When Diversity Becomes Dictatorship," written by a man who had never once attended a Skyspan policy meeting. She handed the phone back calmly and asked, "How is internal morale?" Her assistant paused, still high. Surprisingly, most of the backlash is external. The staff who know you see this as noise. The division heads are backing your plan, but the media storm is growing. Maya walked to the window. Her arms crossed, her jaw tight. Her reflection stared back, not angry but weary, the kind of weariness that comes not from one battle but from the weight of 100 unspoken ones. She thought about the faces of the women whose stories she had read, whose hands she had shaken, whose voices she had carried into rooms where they were never meant to speak. She could not fail them now, not because of critics, not because of cowards. She turned back toward her assistant and said, "Schedule the press conference, but do it on our terms, not theirs. I'll speak from the South Terminal rooftop. Make sure every employee gets a live stream invite. No flashy backdrop, no PR framing. This isn't about branding, it's about truth." The following day, under a soft gray sky, Maya stood on the rooftop of the very terminal where it all began, the place where someone once told her to wait in economy, where someone once rolled their eyes and dismissed her humanity, where someone once saw her and assumed she was invisible. Now cameras surrounded her, staff lined the balconies, and the live stream pulsed across screens from corporate offices to employee break room. She stepped up to the microphone wearing the same black suit she wore on the day of the incident and spoke without notes, without a teleprompter, without fear. "This is not about me," she began. "This is about what it means when someone sees you and decides you do not belong, not because of your skills or your status, but because of your skin, your name, your presence." She did not raise her voice, but let it carry like wind across the rooftop. "This is about every employee who was told to stay silent, to work twice as hard for half the recognition, to smile through insult and push through assumptions. This is about rewriting the rules that were never written for us to win." She spoke about the backlash not with bitterness but clarity, about the articles, the critics, the names they called her, the questions they asked of her that were never asked of her male counterparts or her white peers. And then she said something no one expected. I'm not a hero. I am not perfect, and I am not trying to be. I am simply a woman who refuses to be quiet. When I see harm wearing a name tag and holding a headset." Hush fell across the terminal, not out of discomfort but awakening. "This is not the end," she said. "It is the beginning. And if you want to stand with me, you do not need to post or pose. You need only do one thing: see people clearly before you serve them, before you speak to them, before you assume them." The cameras caught every word, but the real change was not in the footage. It was in the people listening after the speech. She walked down the steps and through the terminal, receiving no applause, only eyes wide with understanding, not admiration but reflection. That was all she had wanted. But just when she thought the moment would settle, a man approached her from behind, dressed in a tailored grey suit, holding a document folder with gold seal. He introduced himself with a polite voice and a firm handshake. "Miss Jameson, I'm here on behalf of the board. We've reviewed your full plan, and while we respect your leadership, we have to consider the growing financial and legal risks. The board is asking you to pause further equity division expansions until external review is complete. They've also requested you step down from public commentary until the next quarterly review." Maya blinked slowly once, twice, and took the folder from his hand. She opened it, read the request, then looked up and said something he did not expect. "No," he stiffened. "I understand this is difficult, but your refusal to comply could result in formal review of your position within investor oversight." She handed the folder back and said firmly, "Then review it, and when you do, make sure they understand this is not a request for their comfort. It is a call for their character. If they cannot stand beside me, they will never stand in front of me again." She turned and walked away, leaving behind a stunned messenger and a silence that echoed longer than any speech that night. She stood once more at her window, the skyline glowing like a river of stars, her phone filled with messages both hateful and hopeful. But she didn't answer any of them. Instead, she closed her eyes and remembered her mother's voice, the one that used to say, "You may not always be welcome, but you were never made to wait." And as the wind pressed against the glass and the city turned slowly beneath her feet, she knew that no matter what the board decided, no matter what the world whispered, she would not stop, because the seat they tried to deny her was never theirs to assign. It was hers all along. She never waited again. 3 weeks passed, and in those 3 weeks, the silence from the board was louder than any statement, louder than any leaked memo or urgent email. Maya knew what that kind of silence meant. It was the kind that came before a decision, the kind that came from powerful people trying to calculate risk and image, trying to weigh the value of progress against the comfort of control. She had been in those rooms before, had watched men in tailored suits whisper words like restructure and decorum and stability, while sipping espresso from imported cups in rooms painted with polished neutrality and scented with self-preservation. But this time, Maya was not waiting outside the door. This time she owned part of the building, and she had already opened the door herself. On the morning of the review, Maya arrived at Ski-Span headquarters alone, no entourage, no camera crew, no statement prepared. She wore navy blue today, not black, her hair pinned back, her face bare. She walked past the reception where the staff rose, not out of habit, but out of quiet respect, and she stepped into the elevator with a calm that made the air inside still. When the boardroom doors opened, every seat was filled, the long glass table surrounded by men and women whose names held weight in every global report, people who managed billions and measured everything in quarterly gains and liability charts. But today, their charts could not calculate the impact of being seen by the unseen, of giving voice to those who were once background noise. She sat in her seat at the far end of the table and waited for them to speak. Their chairman cleared his throat and opened a folder, his voice carefully neutral. "Ms. Jameson, thank you for joining us. We've reviewed your equity initiative, your policies, and the external feedback. We have taken into account both the financial uptick in employee retention and the rising market trust, but also the ongoing media scrutiny and polarizing responses." Maya did not flinch. "We also reviewed your refusal to pause or remain silent, and while some viewed this as insubordination, others on this board recognize it as integrity, so we put it to a vote." He looked around the room and then back at her. "The board has voted to expand your equity division formally across all Skyspan regions. We are allocating additional budget and assigning a direct line of leadership under your direction. Furthermore, you will remain on the board with increased discretionary power over social policy reform and leadership training protocols." There was a beat of silence, not shock, but gravity, the weight of a shift finally landing. Maya looked each of them in the eye and said simply, "I accept." The meeting ended without applause, but with purpose. And when she exited the building, the staff on the ground floor had gathered, not to cheer but to simply be present, people from every floor, every department, some in uniforms, others in suits, standing shoulder to shoulder without signs or chants. Just eyes that said finally. Later that week, she returned to the same airport, where everything began, not out of ceremony, but because her flight to a policy conference was scheduled, and Maya never rescheduled for symbolism. She walked to the check encounter, and this time the woman behind it stood upright and said, "Good morning, Ms. Jameson. Your private suite is prepared. May I assist with anything else?" Maya smiled, not from pride but from recognition, then looked past her to see a young trainee, nervously adjusting his badge, clearly new, clearly trying his best, and she walked over to him and said softly, "Your name matters, your tone matters, your questions matter. Remember that, and you will change more than flights, you will change the sky itself." He nodded, eyes wide, and Maya turned, walking toward her gate, where the sun lit the corridor, and her reflection followed, not as shadow, but as proof that the door once closed had opened forever somewhere. On the other side of the world, a young woman applied for an executive training position, using her own name proudly listed, and beside her application she attached a note with only one sentence: "I do not wait in a command." Miles above the ground, in a jet designed for the elite, a woman named Maya sat beside a window, not to enjoy the view but to remember the journey, and every time someone asked where it all began, she smiled and said, "It began when I stopped waiting and started walking." The end.